So today we are nerding out on the numbers behind your multi-day tours. If you're a DMC, tour operator, or a travel business who runs multi-day itineraries, this video is specifically for you. Now, for the purpose of this video, and I've done this a little differently, I'm using a margin calculator from Peter Syme, who is the co-founder of Tourpreneur. Now, I'm not affiliated or associated or sponsored to use this tool in any way. I discovered the article is completely free of charge, but I find it so useful to help simulate the numbers behind your or understanding the costs and revenue markers and simulations and scenarios that you can possibly run around different tour types. And specifically, why we're diving into this, I'm giving you 3 different scenarios, and I'm going to run through those scenarios to help you identify where specifically in your customer experience and operations it's costing you more time and money, and coincidentally those align very close together. In each of these 3 different scenarios, there's 3 different problems that we'll be looking at and the impact those make on your margin. What I will do is I'll put the link to the tool in the description so you can read the article, play around with the tool for yourself, and you can have a go at both your break-even analysis, but also have a look and build different scenarios for different itineraries that you have. For this, I've used really similar numbers for most of the tours, just variances of these 3 different challenges that I see quite a lot through different founders and MDs and different travel businesses that I'm speaking to. If you are that tour operator who is finding that your margin, your profit is being eaten away by a lot of heavy manual work, you're struggling to retain clients, you find yourselves doing a lot of firefighting back and forth because you have no contingency planning, this video will specifically help you identify where you can find that, where you can see it, and what you can do to make a difference. If you are new to the channel, you have no idea who I am. I'm Bella Hegarty, and I'm your customer experience and operations partner, specifically working with your travel business on how you can improve the structure behind the scenes to make your customer experience so much more incredible, because you have the time and the headspace to do the small, finer details that create lasting memories, while your business runs smoothly behind the scenes and makes you more money. So let's dive in. Before we dive into the 3 different scenarios, I'm going to talk you through how this is laid out. So this top section, you'll probably know this is your tour basics: capacity, duration, ticket price, how many guests actually book. So you'll probably have on an occupancy rate, this slider will give you an opportunity to change the scenarios up and down. You've got your ancillary revenue. This looks at if you have solo travelers, what it costs for that single supplement, if you have discounts on it, average optional spend. So if there's upsells or commissions that happen at any point in time and that uptake rate of that. Then you jump down to your direct costs. Now, this is pretty standard as well. This is things that as an established tour operator or someone who has been running their business or travel agency for a while, you will know a lot of these. This will be really self-explanatory. You'll go through this on a regular basis. Now, some of this as a travel agent or the person that does the booking and you use DMCs, some of this pricing you won't be dealing with. You get this directly from your DMCs or travel suppliers. However, as a DMC, you will know a lot of this very well. Or if you're a travel agent that handles everything end to end, again, this will be really familiar. This just gives a really good overview, and it's such a nice way to play around with the numbers to see what you can do, where you can tweak and refine, and where you can optimize. But what I find really interesting is this number 4, behind the scenes costs. So this jumps into your marketing and distribution, your advertising for a single trip or service. You have your credit card processing fees, insurance per guest. And what I really find interesting here is the tech and admin per booking and your tour development. Now, depending on who you are and where you get your bookings from, this section will be really varied. Now, this tour development, amortized, is about the building of the tour or the itinerary and the cost associated with that. Now, if you say, well, I've run this trip, we've probably run it for the past 7 years and we haven't changed anything, well, you would be calculating the amount there of what it cost you to create the trip, how many times you've run it, and you just proportionate that cost out across that entire time. The more times you run the trip, the cheaper that cost is. If you're running bespoke trips every single time, you will see how high this is. Now, that leads me very nicely into my first scenario. But okay, so our first scenario is, let's say we're a boutique adventure travel agency. We have a small team where everything is very bespoke. All trips are organized very manually. We have systems to bring the bookings in. It might be through a simple booking form online. Everything's done by custom inquiries. There's a team member at the other side of that. It's a very handheld service. And that might mean, let's say your tour capacity has 10 seats and your ticket price per person, let's say, is about £5,500. We're working on a basis of pounds here. You can change your currency at the top here if your scenario is different, or you work in a different currency. Let's say that you're fully booked on this tour. The tour duration is 5 days. There's no solo travelers. They're all couples that have booked this tour, or it's an entire group that have booked it. Now, you've got then your hotel room rate is as follows: £180 a night. Your tour duration is 5 days, so 4 nights. You've then got 4 dinners included. Your local guide costs are £750. Your tour leader rate is £300. Transport, dinner cost per person, activities per person, they're all included in here. Now, what we're looking at, and I want to explain for this scenario, where everything's manual, your team are capped at time, this is where I want to go down to this tech and admin per booking. So at the moment, with this ticket price, you're fully booked. And if this was how much we spent per booking on admin, communications, guest liaison, collecting dietary requirements, collecting preferences, booking travel, dealing with issues that potentially might happen across the trip, that's that side of it. And then to develop that tour, at the moment, as a base cost, it's this. And this doesn't include, and you've got things like your office overhead, for example. What this doesn't include, if your tour leader is you or one of your team members that has to be on the trip because it requires them to be with them, this tour leader daily rate could go up to, let's say, 500 a day. Then you've got here, okay, well, because everything's manual, it takes a lot of back and forth. So actually, if I look at the team's time and what that costs, that's about £700 per booking. And then our tour development, well, it took us a really long time. It took us almost a month of doing that to create the tour, or 2 weeks back and forth with about 3 or 4 team members. You could look at that being about a month's salary to create that tour. Now you can immediately see what that starts to do to our margin. And then if it takes longer, there's a lot of back and forth, there's issues or things that fall through the cracks because you're having to spend a lot of time doing things. Again, let's say that it probably takes us about 30, maybe more than 30 hours per booking. You then could say this could go up to 1,500. So the more time it takes for you to do things, the more admin costs, the more back and forth, the more manual work. That's the team's time that it's taking. But that just then goes to show that operating margin gets lower and lower and lower because we're spending more time where we're completely capped at capacity. And let's say then we didn't book all 10 places, we booked 8. That takes our margin to 7.1%. So it would mean that it's really close, like we have to pretty much fill that tour for us to get any sort of margin out of this. But then if you look at this here, and this was to go down and we didn't spend that much on it, 500, tour development went down because we've managed to create a standardization for how we're running this tour. Again, that would go down to, let's say, around 500. And then that tour leader cost per day, we didn't have a tour leader on it. We just ran it with the local guides and you had any from there. That takes our margin up to around 44%. And you can see the difference here is just from having someone that's leading the tour on it, or if you have those local guides, depending on what that looks like, you could have someone from the DMC that supports on the trip, or it's all run from you back at the office. Really depends on how you run it. And you might have your local guides might be included in the trip. They don't necessarily need you there hands on because you've got really trusted guides that you work with, and the DMC really manages all of that communication, quality control, and that relationship is really solid. It takes your margin from what was 7% for really high tech and admin per booking. It then goes up to 41 to 44.9, 45% margin. So you can see the difference in how much money. And for this, if you look at here, your total revenue, total cost, your cost per guest is almost at 50%. So that's where you show 18,000 profit versus what we had before. But it goes to show the more time we spend behind the scenes, the more it eats away at what we take away from it. So what that is telling me is that if we can streamline and add some standardization to our processes around our customer experience, that gives us the opportunity to be able to reduce the tech, the admin, the back and forth, and the potential development around the tour, because we have got a standard way of running it. It means that we can then focus on those incredible details because we're not spending so much time doing all of the manual work. So with that, let's dive into scenario B. Okay, so similar scenario, 10 seats, 10 guests. Our ticket price is 3,500. Let's go with 4,500 for our 5 days. And we have no single travelers. We have 4 nights in the hotel, 4 dinners, and our costs pretty much stay exactly the same, right? We've got our tour leader, our local guide costs, and then we've got our behind the scenes cost. Now, this costing at the moment is what it looks like if we have no contingency fund and no currency risk buffer. It takes us, and we have an operating margin of about 43%. Now, which sounds amazing, but this doesn't give us, it gives us 43% of, let's say 14,000, let's say profit, to work off what happens if, and that's our contingency. So all things that could possibly go wrong where we have a extra cost. So if we require a rescue and it's on us, or a weather window doesn't happen and we have to start refunding things, or we change elements of the itinerary due to weather, access. For example, you need to drive to a different location because the location that you previously found, you didn't know that something happened in the area and all the businesses needed to close. So there's a lot of unforeseen issues or changes or challenges that you always come across in any sort of travel or adventure travel. And it's about how we adapt and what we put in place for that. So currently, our profit doesn't look too bad. Even if we put an emergency fund and we had to pay out and it cost us, like, let's say 15% of our margin, that goes down from kind of 49 to 39. So we've lost about 10%. So we've now gone down to 13,000. So our cost is a little bit higher. It still gives us some room, right? But if this then goes up to, we use about 20% extra margin on contingency of things that go wrong. Let's say you need to pay for an emergency helicopter, hotels accidentally double book, so you then have to get people in a new hotel. A natural disaster happens, so you then have to repatriate everyone. These are all things that certainly happen. And then there's currency risk buffers where you've obviously got transfer charges and currency costs from one to another. We've had this recently at Reconnect where we're working out our margins on all our costs in pounds, but a lot of our DMCs charge in euros or dollars, where we have to then figure out that exchange rate plus their tax that goes on top. So the standard rate is not just the standard rate, because then they're adding tax on top. So you're adding 2 to 3% there on contingency risk, but which doesn't show us too bad. So let's say we come away with 36. Now, if we didn't have a trip that was as expensive, it was 2,500. Wow, that completely changes things. It just means our revenue has to be at a certain amount to be able to cover it. Even if we took ourselves to 3,500, that's pretty good. But it just goes to show here, at 3,000 a ticket price, and our emergency fund, and if we were to use all of this, is about 25%, especially in the adventure field. This is more typically of what you're going to see. Your profit per guest goes down significantly. And in a scenario where you are typically going to face things that go wrong and that might cost extra time, and again, with that contingency could be for certain things in the unexpected, but that might not be your team's time in dealing with that. So that then might go up again from this to £300 per booking. Or it might go up to £500 per booking. What I would caveat here is, obviously, this scenario really depends on, firstly, the type of trip and the level of service that you offer. It also depends on how your business is structured. So if you are a travel agent who uses DMCs and the DMCs give you a flat rate, or if you're a DMC and you're working with travel business owners, this is just as relevant, or even more so, because you're the one that's dealing with the cost, even though they're bringing in the client. So if one of your guides suddenly gets ill 2 days before, and they can't participate or guide the tour, then you need to come out of your emergency fund to be able to subsidize for getting somebody at the last minute. And this is where costs might increase, and you're the one that has to take on that responsibility. If you're a travel agent that's providing the service end to end, and it's your guide, your team, that could make it significantly more challenging if then you've got to go out and find somebody to deliver that tour if your team can't do it. But also, not only that, it's that out of that fund, you might not then be able to manage and deliver the tour to the same level as you would with your own guides. And then that contingency fund might then have to cost more in refunds that you might be giving to clients if they were unhappy. And then the ongoing fallout of that. So it just goes to show there. And if you have business expenses, software, team payroll, etc., this doesn't give you that much to go with. So understanding and giving yourself a good emergency fund, the less you use of that, the better. And what that means for our customer experience and operations, the more we communicate with guests, set really clear expectations, have a clear plan A, plan B, plan C, have a decent network of guides. We know what happens and when. We know how to manage these certain situations. So if something does happen, the team aren't left floundering going, what do we do now? There is always a solution that you can jump on immediately to be able to solve these problems, which makes it a hell of a lot easier for your guests and for your team and for your. So the question I will leave you with for this scenario is, how much of a buffer do you give yourself for things to go wrong? I would encourage you to plan a lot more for conditions where there might be a catastrophe versus planning for everything to go perfectly. So that leads me really nicely onto our third scenario. Our third scenario is that travel business that has a fantastic tour. They are fully booked. They have a great marketing engine. They sell a lot of their tours, but they never get to bring clients back. They have no means of an offboarding process. They don't have a way of collecting reviews, and they don't have very high numbers of repeat bookings. Now, you'll see here the same details. So the same tour with 10 seats, the same price point, the same number of nights. All of this information is exactly the same. Now, the only difference here is that they spend 18% of ticket revenue on marketing and distribution, and their advertising cost is about $5,000 for this certain trip. Now you can see here that it really gives them, only a 12% margin on that tour compared to the ticket price. And it's a good 20% of that. And this doesn't even include OTA fees. So if you've got marketing and distribution and you're paying OTA fees on top of that, that would significantly increase this. If you spent 25% of that, it takes your operating margin down to about 5.6%. What this means is if you're not able to retain those guests, you're then having to start from scratch every single time to put more money and cost into advertising to get new guests to book again. If we spent significantly less on marketing, so we improved our onboarding strategy and we improved our way that we're collecting feedback on the trip itself. So we're setting really clear expectations with guests. We're getting to know them, understanding their needs. We have an incredible customer experience. We're gathering their feedback. We understand and segment that client, and we get an idea from them on the trip itself as to what else they would be interested in. And we give them a really good way of following up to being able to do that, whether that's through email marketing, whether that's through manual check-ins, whether that's through specific advertisements to that person. And that could be through social media, that could be through paid advertising, that could be SEO. There could be multiple ways that you could do this within communities that they might be in, for example. So let's say this number drops to 10%. And advertising, we get quite a few clients that come back to different trips. So our advertising drops to around 2,500. So it halves. Our operating margin then goes up to 27.8% just because of that reduction in marketing and distribution. That is a huge, significant amount we've saved just by dropping this amount of money from 18, where it takes us at 12 margin, to 10% and 2,500. It completely changes the landscape of what our margin is. It really shows here that if we spend a small amount of time to create a structure and a process around offboarding and how we are looking at improving our retention and repeat bookings, when we look at how we can improve that strategy, that completely changes the average amount of money we can make per trip into new trips. So we need to put less money in to get clients on board, but it also requires less effort from us to be able to get them to come back again. And this significant impact, this only compounds, like the impact of this work only compounds more and more over time. Because the more that you can do that, there are things that you will do that actually don't require any of your effort or finance at all. Word of mouth is such a strong, and especially in travel, and I would say in any industry, but especially in travel and destinations, I've been speaking to a lot of tour operators and adventure travel businesses where most of their revenue comes from word of mouth or repeat bookings. Now that, if for a guest that might come back 5 years in a row, or let's say 4 of those guests book the same trip 5 years in a row, but bring friends and relatives and colleagues and they book other things, that is, let's say per guest, that is a significant price per person that you do not have to go and source or invest into your marketing. So one thing I want to caveat with this calculator, this tech and admin field, at the moment it is one flat rate. Now, depending on the type of business structure you have, it's not necessarily going to be one flat rate for all of the admin involved in a trip. You might charge a certain amount. If you're a DMC or a travel supplier, you will create a package that you will potentially sell to a DMC, that will potentially sell to a travel agent. Depending on who you are in this scenario, you might look at this field slightly differently. But what I would be really mindful of is your time or the operational time behind the scenes isn't necessarily going to be a flat rate. We can work it out. It will be works out depending on who is the one doing the work. So you might have a project manager or an operations manager that is cheaper than you doing the work. So what you will caveat in this could be a predicted cost, for example. What I would work out in a separate scenario is the actual cost when you do your trip. So use this scenario as your base level of this is what we want to charge for this. And you might have different admin costs or operational costs for your people's time, i.e. in itinerary building, in client delivery, management, liaison, customer service. There could be a couple of other areas that you might have extra admin when it comes to delivery. And that might include the person's time actually on the trip, or if there's anything else associated with that. That might cover that person's time, but it doesn't account for multiple people necessarily working on this. It doesn't account for if you jump in. So what I would create is this is our ideal, and then that field might have to be built out depending on where specifically that person is working on this. Also, I would caveat and say that if you are a travel agent, the DMC would have their package, and then you would have your time for your team to organise and do everything else on top of that. So how they would manage the client, how they would manage the sales process, onboarding, communications, all of that would come on top of what's included in this. If you're a DMC, again, you've got other time that might be admin dealing with travel suppliers, admin dealing with travel agents. So that needs to be included in this as well. So that one flat fee for the tech and admin might need to be adapted, because you then might have software that comes to client delivery that you're not including in this. Then you might also have different types of admin time depending on what it is. So that field is a little bit nuanced, but what I would encourage you to do is try and create an inclusive number of, to run a trip, this is the amount of hours or cost it takes us in terms of admin, communication and management time. And then when you come to conduct a trip, actually work that time out and that cost out to you in more depth, that you can then change and update this all-inclusive time. I would say the biggest drains on your margin, and one of the biggest issues that I come across, is when that section creeps up and up and up, there is often you're spending so much more time managing the admin behind a trip than you forecast for and that you've priced for, which shows to me that there's issues in your operations or your customer experience that's causing you to be able to do that. And throughout these three different scenarios, whether that's everything's very, very manual, you may see the difference there. If you've got no contingency planning, again, you'll see a bit of a difference there. And then if you have struggled to retain clients, you might see a bit there, but you would primarily see all of that cost being sucked into your marketing and your advertising, which actually might then cause a bit of extra team and admin time, because you're then having to collect new dietary requirements. You're then, every client that you're bringing, you're going through this process, or whatever your customer journey is, you're going through every process, crossing every I and dotting every T, because you've got a lot of information to collect along the way, a lot of communications to go out. However, if you've got a repeat client, one, there's less time in selling to them. They already know what they're going in for. You already probably have dietary requirements, preferences, information about them. So it's less of a collection, more of a confirmation, which saves you a lot of time throughout this process, which means that admin time could potentially go down and your marketing costs go down, giving you more margin because you already know who they are. And it's a lot easier, it's easier, cheaper and faster to retain existing clients than it is to bring on new ones. So like I said, the link to this calculator and the article that goes with it, and it gives a lot of information on different nuances for if you're running multi-day tours, self-guided trips, day tours and activities. There is a lot of different information on how to use this depending on who you are and what you run. Dive into this calculator, run your numbers, see what the different scenarios that you have bring up for you. And if the margins scare you a little bit, or there's something that doesn't feel comfortable and it shows it in the res, that's good, because that means you're identifying where the gaps are in your customer experience and your operations. And if any questions surface for you specifically on any of the areas that I've mentioned into this video, drop those questions into the comments, give any thoughts, any perspectives on scenarios for your business. And I encourage you, if there are any changes that you're going to make, work out the times in your business that are quieter for you to be able to do that. Don't head into peak season with all of these leaky gaps in your customer experience. Focus on plugging them so that you have the smoothest season yet.